Israel, officially the State of Israel, is a country in Western Asia. It has an area of 20,770 square kilometers. Jerusalem is its capital and largest city. Hebrew is the official language of Israel, and new shekel is its official currency. Israel has a population of around 8,700,000. It shares its land border with 4 countries: Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. The Mediterranean Sea is the western border of Israel. The citizens or permanent residents of the State of Israel are called Israelis. Israel is located on the continent of Asia. Israel is a small but diverse country in the Middle East, with many attractions for tourists, including its temperate climate, many beaches, and archaeological, historical and biblical sites of interest. Israel's $100 billion economy is larger than all its abutting neighbors combined. It has the highest standard of living in the Middle East. It also has the highest per capita home computer ownership. Israel has the highest concentration of high-tech and startup companies, over 3,000, in the world outside of the United States. It has the highest rate of entrepreneurship in the world for women and people over 55, and the third highest in general. Israel is a world leader in the invention of new technologies. Some of the technologies it has produced are the cell phone, voicemail technology, the first antivirus software, the Pentium MMX chip technology, and most of the Windows NT operating system. Of Israel's total workforce, 24% hold college degrees and 12% hold advanced degrees. The world's largest wholesale diamond center is Israel, and most of the cut and polished diamonds in the world come from the country. It was also the first nation to adopt the Kimberley process. This is a new international standard that certifies diamonds as conflict-free. Israel is the largest immigrant-absorbing country in the world, in proportion to its population size. With people from more than 100 countries from 5 continents, Israel's culture is extremely varied. Israel is the only country in the world that has a mandatory military service requirement for women. Over 90% of the land is owned by the State of Israel and managed by the Israel Land Authority, ILA, which issues long-term leasing rights for it. All citizens in Israel, Jews and Arabs, enjoy full political rights. Women also enjoy full rights, like they are not afforded anywhere else in the Middle East. Hiking and camping are an integral part of the country's culture. Israeli school and youth groups are taken on annual hiking trips throughout Israel, raising their children with the love for hiking and outdoor exercise. Bomba, a peanut butter-flavored snack, is made exclusively in Israel and considered by many to be the national food. Israel has more of each of these per capita than any other country. More books printed, more museums and more orchestras. The most free and independent Arabic press in the Middle East is in the country of Israel. Israel recycles wastewater, and 50% of its irrigated water comes from this. More than 85% of Israel's solid waste is treated to be environmentally sound as well, making Israel one of the most environmentally clean nations on earth. Folk dancing is highly popular in Israel, especially the traditional folk dance called the hora. Israeli modern dance companies are highly acclaimed in the international dance world. This folk dancing is also choreographed for recreational and performance dance groups. Israelis, per capita, are the world's biggest consumers of fruits and vegetables. Israeli banknotes have braille markings on them so the blind can read them. Israeli scientists have ruled that giraffe meat and milk are kosher. Israel has become the first country to ban the use of underweight models on catwalks in order to combat anorexia. Israel actually began the 21st century with more trees, a net gain in their number of trees. It was one of only 2 countries in the world that did. A company in Israel has developed the first jellyfish repellent in the world. The airspace above Israel is a bird superhighway. At least 500 million birds in 200 different species fly through there each spring and fall, headed to and from Asia, Africa, and Europe. In 1952, the famous scientist Albert Einstein was offered the position of President of Israel. He politely turned down the position. Approximately 1,000 letters arrive in Jerusalem, Israel annually addressed to God. Israel is the only country in the world that has the same name, is located in the same land, and speaks the same language as it did 3,000 years ago. The State of Israel was declared in 1948 after Britain withdrew from its mandate of Palestine. The UN proposed partitioning the area into Arab and Jewish states, and Arab armies that rejected the UN plan were defeated. Israel was admitted as a member of the UN in 1949 and saw rapid population growth, primarily due to migration from Europe and the Middle East, over the following years. Israel fought wars against its Arab neighbors in 1967 and 1973, followed by peace treaties with Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in the 1967 war and subsequently administered those territories through military authorities. Israel and Palestinian officials signed a number of interim agreements in the 1990s that created an interim period of Palestinian self-rule in the West Bank and Gaza. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. While the most recent formal efforts to negotiate final status issues occurred in 2013 to 2014, the U.S. continues its efforts to advance peace. Immigration to Israel continues, with 28,600 new immigrants, mostly Jewish, in 2016. Israel signed normalization agreements brokered by the U.S. with Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco in late 2020, and with Sudan in early 2021. And most recently, a ceasefire's been agreed between Israel and the Palestinian militant Hamas. It comes after 11 days of fighting, where at least 240 people have been killed. Most of those deaths have been Palestinians in the territory of Gaza. Israel and Hamas both claimed victory in the latest conflict. The latest violence followed a month of rising tensions in Jerusalem. But the fighting has gone on for decades. An Israeli company has developed a revolutionary spray-on skin made of nanofiber to help heal wounds. Israelis love kids. With an average of 3 children per woman, Israel has the highest fertility rate among the 37 countries in the OECD, where the average is 1.7. Israel performs more in vitro fertilization per capita than any other country, and it's free for the first 2 babies. Babies in Israel are 10 times less likely to be allergic to peanuts than in other countries. Studies suggest it's because they eat bomba peanut snacks from an early age. According to Hebrew language Wikipedia, there are 7 different ways to eat a krembo, one of Israel's favorite snacks. Members of a voluntary organization called Trail Angels open their homes to hikers on the 1,025-kilometer, 637-mile Israel Trail, offering free beds, showers and other amenities. Israel is roughly half the size of Lake Michigan. The glue on Israel's postage stamps is kosher. Israel has over 50 alternative meat startups, a disproportionately high number compared to elsewhere around the world, making it a fake meat powerhouse. Perhaps it's no surprise, given that the country has more vegans per capita. Researchers in Israel have grown mouse embryos in bottles in a revolutionary way to observe the first stages of mammalian embryonic development. In 2020, Israel was the 8th most expensive country in the world to live in. Switzerland came in at number 1. Israelis eat some 24 million sufganiyot, donuts, during the 8-day holiday of Hanukkah. In 2020, Tel Aviv was named the fifth most expensive city in the world to live in, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. Zurich, Paris and Hong Kong came in before it. An Israeli company has developed a paint that uses sunlight to activate a cooling mechanism on cars, buildings, planes and even clothing, providing air conditioning without electricity. The hotter it is, the more the coating cools. Syrian hamsters were first domesticated as pets by a zoologist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1930. Israel has its very own Stonehenge, an ancient stone circle called Galgal Refam with massive rock walls that jut 8 feet into the sky. The stone structure is around 5,000 years old and is made up of some 42,000 tons of basalt stone. It was only discovered in the 1960s. The Mount of Olives is the oldest continuously used cemetery in the world. It's been in use for over 3,000 years. Israel is home to the largest known dog cemetery of the ancient world. More than 1,300 dog skeletons, most of them puppies, were found at the Ashkelon site. Israeli students won an international award for producing real honey without bees, using a bacterium program to learn how to make honey. An Israeli company has developed an atmospheric water generator that can create clean drinking water from the air. It has been deployed in disaster situations all over the world. Israel has the largest underground hospital in the world, the 2,000-bed Sami Ofer Fortified Underground Emergency Hospital at Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa. In Israel it is legal to write the Jewish calendar date on all official documents, including checks, instead of, or in addition to, the Gregorian date. A Tel Aviv company has invented a folding car that can retract its wheels for narrow streets and snug spots, but still can reach speeds of 55 miles an hour. The main compounds of the cannabis plant were first isolated, analyzed, synthesized, and named in Israel. An Israeli company provides off-grid, solar-powered automatic hand-washing stations to developing countries, using water pulled from the atmosphere mixed with a precise dose of soap to fight the spread of life-threatening infections. A revolutionary human on a chip developed at Hebrew University aims to replace animal testing for new pharmaceuticals. In Israel, people regularly stumble on amazing ancient finds while out hiking. Archaeologists recently discovered the world's oldest woven basket in the Judean desert. The oldest ever cave tool, dating back 350,000 years, was found in Israel. The field of video therapy was invented at Jerusalem's Ma'ale School of Television, Film and the Arts. Israeli scientists made a robot here using a dead locust's ear. In Israel, people are taught from an early age to turn off the tap while they brush their teeth to save precious water. In Israel, a meal without a salad is not a meal. Even breakfast. Tel Aviv has over 4,000 Bauhaus buildings, the largest concentration of Bauhaus buildings of any city in the world. An Israeli company has developed the world's first autonomous beehive. It can house up to 40 bee colonies, around 2 million bees, and take care of their health and upkeep with a simple app. During Passover in Israel, supermarkets are not allowed to sell chametz, forbidden foods like bread and cakes, and if you bring the products to the checkout, they cannot be scanned. Large sections of the shops are covered in plastic sheets. Israel's parliament, the Knesset, has 120 seats because it's modeled after the Second Temple-era Knesset Haggadah, the Great Assembly, a leadership body of 120 sages, prophets and scribes. In Israel, there's hardly such thing as a gift registry for weddings and bar mitzvahs. Instead, people come to the parties bearing envelopes full of cash. Matzot Aviv and Bnei Brak baked the world's largest matzah this year, 6 kilograms, 6 meters long, 1.06 meters wide, 4 millimeters thick. The Israel Startup Nation cycling team's roster for the 2021 season includes 32 riders from Israel and 16 other countries, including four-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome from Great Britain. Tel Aviv University recently launched the world's only center for combating pandemics, aiming to create best practices for infection containment, vaccine and treatment development, and social and economic resilience. Israeli companies raised a record-breaking $10 billion in investments during 2020, despite the uncertainty and instability caused by the worldwide pandemic. 85% of Israeli households get hot water from rooftop solar heaters, compared to less than 1% in the United States. An Israeli scientist's invention to turn dog droppings into odorless sterile fertilizer powder instantly is starting to revolutionize how animal and human waste is disposed of. Israel has more than 300 wineries, 70 of which harvest at least 50 tons of grapes per year. Approximately 60,000 tons of wine grapes are harvested in Israel annually.